Buenos dias et bienvenue. Hi everybody, welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers about them, not with the intent to tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but in order to explore one potential way to play a character, hopefully to create something that is both very fun, but also really powerful to play in game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on a character that you would like to play, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host. Couple of housekeeping items really quick before we jump in. First up, I'm probably not going to be doing a video next week. Sorry, it's spring break, and I'm planning on going on a trip with my family. So depending on how much writing I'm actually able to get done while I'm gone, I don't think it's going to happen. So let's assume that's the case, and then any surprises will be pleasant ones, I suppose. Also, if you would like a write-up of the character build that I do each week that gives like a step-by-step guide on how to recreate the character so that you don't have to go back and watch the video again or take notes or whatever, please consider joining the channel as a member. There should be a little button down there if you're watching on a desktop or a laptop. If you're on mobile, I think you have to go into my profile. For $2 a month, you get access to the library of write-ups that I've created for the episodes that I've built that do give you that kind of step-by-step walkthrough guide on recreating the character. It's a great way to support the channel and help me create more and better content, but even if you're not interested in doing that, just being here, liking, subscribing, commenting are also great ways to support the channel. So thank you regardless. I appreciate you being here. And an especially big thanks to all of my channel members. You guys rock. Bards. They're just the best, right? Except when they're the worst. Usually both. I love bards in D&D. I love the idea of a character who not only entertains with music and the spoken word, but who potentially heals, controls, buffs, debuffs, and even does damage with music and oration. It's fun. It's a little weird, if we're being honest, I think. It's very often funny, though it doesn't have to be, but everyone wants a bard in the party because bards are great support characters, right? They make everyone else in the party better at whatever it is that they're trying to do. But is that the only thing that a bard can be good at? Support? Of course not. But I kind of think that if you're going to play a bard, you should at the very least plan on debuffing the enemies, buffing your allies, healing just a little bit. So much of what they inherently get as part of their class just really makes them good at those things naturally. But wouldn't it be great if we could build a bard who is mostly support in combat, but can do other things exceptionally well once in a while too? Especially if that other thing is to totally destroy an enemy with a huge round of Nova damage. Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of builds like this lately, and they're sort of becoming my favorite type of character. Someone who can bring both damage and support, or maybe control, like in the case of the Hammer Time video that I did a couple of weeks ago. And for a character who's going to be bringing primarily support to a team, like bards are so good at doing, I think if you're going to do damage as well, it should be probably in the form of burst or Nova damage. You blow some resources, you take out one enemy early on in the fight, hopefully, to get things going your party's way. Then you sit back and spend the rest of your actions and bonus actions and resources buffing and debuffing and just making sure everyone else is having a good time. It's so effective tactically and really makes playing support characters a lot more versatile and, for most people, I think, definitely for myself anyway, a lot more fun. Now, switching gears for a moment. There's a neat little trick that not everyone knows about with the Booming Blade spell when coupled with the Warcaster feat. I know you know this already. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everybody else. If you have the Warcaster feat, you can cast a spell when you get an opportunity attack, right? If the spell you cast is the Booming Blade spell, you still get to make a weapon attack as part of the spell, including all that entails, and then also add some extra damage from the spell itself on the initial attack once you're level 5 and beyond anyway. And then, of course, with the Booming Blade spell, if you hit the target takes even more damage if they move before your next turn. And of course, since opportunity attacks happen right before the enemy leaves your reach, they should instantly take the additional damage for moving as well, in the case of a Booming Blade opportunity attack. So, if you can cast Booming Blade as an opportunity attack, it can lead to some really nice damage. Now that's all fine and dandy, of course, for the times that you're actually making an opportunity attack, but the problem with it is that it's not all that reliable. I mean, how often do you get to make opportunity attacks? Usually, for most characters, less than once per combat, I would guess. But what if we could have a reliable way to grant ourselves opportunity attacks almost on demand, at least when we really needed to? Wouldn't that make this tactic particularly fun and powerful? I submit that it would. And I have long wanted to build a character around this little trick, and today is the day that we finally do so. A character who is your typical jack-of-all-trades support bard in many ways, but who, once in a while, sows a discordant thought in their enemy that is so terrifying that they must flee. But when they turn their back to this bard, they pay a heavy, heavy price for doing so. So let's get into it. I proudly present episode 87, The Whisperer. As always, I would love for you to check out this fantastic art by my good friend Randall Hampton. Each week he creates amazing pieces for the character concepts that I submit to him, and he always does such great work, so much flavor and style to his artwork. I love every one of them, including this. It's no exception, of course. And if you would like to potentially commission Randall to create something like this for your own character or party, or just follow him to check out the other stuff that he creates, I'll post links in the video description, as always, on how to do so. Thanks, Randall, and let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1. A couple of weeks ago, in the Hammer Time video that I did, I said I wasn't going to be doing any more, here are some ideas for this character's story stuff in my builds, because I wasn't sure that they added a lot and I didn't want to influence the viewer too much in the story that they created for their character, etc., unless there was a big outcry to the contrary. And like 25% of the comments immediately were like, outcry, except for like 2 people who were like, okay, cool, I didn't really care for those very much anyway. So to those 2 people, I apologize. For everybody else, message received, thank you for caring, and I'll continue to try to brainstorm a little bit about story and background ideas for the characters that I create, especially the ones that multi-class a lot, like this one. So, for this character, when we first meet them, they're not a bard yet. They start their career having made a pact with an otherworldly being. More on that in a moment, but yes, we're going to start off at level 1 with our class as a warlock. And for our race, I want to take Variant Human here. As I said at the beginning, we're sort of building this character around the Warcaster feat, at least for our Nova round of damage. And so I really, really want to start off with that feat right at level 1. I prefer Variant Human over Custom Lineage in this case because there really aren't any half feats that I really want on this character. Charisma-based half feats anyway. So yes, Variant Human. As for the free feat that we get as a Variant Human, like I said, we're going to take Warcaster. You know, I often resist this feat. I complain about it a lot, as I feel like it's often kind of a tax placed upon Gishes who want to be both martial characters and spellcasters, and that kind of rubs me wrong. But the reality is, it is a fantastic feat, and I shouldn't whine about it as much as I do. To review, Warcaster lets us, yes, cast spells with somatic components even if our hands are full of weapons or a weapon and a shield, but it also gives us advantage on our concentration checks, which is fantastic for anyone who's going to be concentrating on a spell, and we will be, of course. But then, most importantly for us, when we get to make an opportunity attack, we can cast a spell instead of making a weapon attack, or, of course, in the case of Booming Blade, we can do both, as we've discussed. This spell has to have a casting time of 1 action and must target only that creature, so Booming Blade qualifies. And just in case you may question whether or not Booming Blade does work with Warcaster, because post Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the range for Booming Blade was changed to self 5 feet. Just keep in mind that there is a difference between the range of a spell and what the spell targets, right? The spell still targets another creature, a single creature. It's just that the range is originating from self out to 5 feet. For those who care, Jeremy Crawford has made it very clear in no uncertain terms that Booming Blade works with Warcaster. As for our ability scores, I assume as always that we're using the point buy method, and I would recommend going with a 15 charisma to start and taking a +1 from our racial there for 16, a 13 constitution +1 there for 14, a 14 dexterity, and a 13 wisdom. The wisdom score is primarily for multi-classing purposes, but it's a multi-class that we're not going to get to until fairly late in this build. If you're not going to be playing this character beyond level 11 or so, feel free to probably bump your constitution a little bit more if you'd prefer. As for equipment, I would recommend going with the gold buy method, picking up some scale mail armor, a shield, your favorite D8 weapon, so a long sword, a battle axe, etc., and then any other necessities your character may have. As a warlock at level 1, we do get our otherworldly patron, and yes, we're gonna go Hexblade. Calm down, Hexblade haters. The last time I even dipped Hexblade was months ago with the nuclear wizard. I get 1 1/4. We're actually going to be making a non-insignificant investment into Hexblade for this character. In fact, at one point, we're going to have more Warlock levels than Bard for just a minute. And we are also going to be jumping around a lot with our classes here. So rather than come up with a story reason for why we're making the shift every single time we do so, I'll do what I do a lot of times with these kinds of instances and say we should, if the DM's good with it, I think, almost think of this character as their own custom class. Not a character who takes a few levels of Warlock, a few levels of Bard, a few levels of something else, but more like an Eldritch Spy or a Blade Whisperer or something like that. This is a character who derives some of their power from a pact that they've entered into with an otherworldly being, yes, but who is also a performer with both magical and martial skill. And though the weapon and the power you are using is in part derived from your pact, it might not necessarily be the only place you get your power from. Some of it might be innate, some learned from study or training. I think this character has perhaps been tasked with the elimination of some important target and granted power to enable you to do so. Your purposes might not necessarily be nefarious. The target you're after might be a villain, after all. But your methods, I think, certainly feel nefarious, even if you hide the darker side of your methods under a facade of story and song. But as a Hexblade at level 1, we get Hex Warrior first up, which gives us proficiency in martial weapons, medium armor, and shields. And we will take advantage of all 3. Thank you very much. Even more importantly, and the main reason we're here, is that we can also cause a non-two-handed weapon to become our hex weapon, allowing us to use our charisma for both our attack and damage rolls instead of strength or dexterity. And for a character who's going to be heavily reliant on spells and weapon attacks for our Nova round especially, being able to use a single stat for both is just really hard to beat and is probably the number one thing that makes Hexblades both so loved and so hated in the D&D community. But we have no shame in taking advantage of it. So we also get Hexblade's Curse as a Hexblade. That's the other big feature here. It's also a great one. Once per short rest, as a bonus action, we can curse an enemy, and thereafter, whenever we roll damage against them, we get to add our proficiency bonus to that damage. We also get critical hits against that target on a 19 or a 20 instead of just a 20, and if they die, we regain hit points equal to our Warlock level plus our Charisma modifier. Really strong ability, especially for a character who's trying to blow somebody up as quickly as possible early in the fight. We also get spells, of course. As a Warlock, level 1, Hexblades get to add Shield and Wrathful Smite to the spells that they can potentially learn, though they aren't just automatically prepared as with many other classes. For cantrips, I think we ought to take Eldritch Blast because we're a Warlock. Having a ranged option is always nice. And then Booming Blade, of course. As for first level spells, I think I would take Shield as it's such a strong defensive spell. Other than that, I might take Armor of Agathis. That's a nice defensive spell as well that can return damage if we get hit. Hex might not be bad, though I don't imagine it using it much after level 1. But anyway, pick your favorites. At level 2 is when we're going to start with our Bard levels and working on our performance and our song and our oration. So yes, as a Bard 1, we do get Bardic Inspiration, of course, the quintessential Bard feature that lets us Charisma modifier times per day for now. As a bonus action, give Bardic Inspiration to an ally, letting them add a d6, which is our Bardic Inspiration die currently, to an attack roll, a saving throw, or an ability check that they make within the next 10 minutes. The really great thing about it is they can use it after they've rolled the die, but before the DM has told them whether what they're trying to do has succeeded or failed. This is one of those things that makes a bard a bard, and something that you should plan on using regularly. We also do get spells as a bard one, and of course there are a lot of great ones. I'd say you should definitely at least pick up Healing Word, so you can satisfy that support role that people are going to be expecting from you, and I'm guessing that you probably enjoy being able to provide. I would also get Fairy Fire here and plan on using that for now for our concentration. It's an action to cast, but then if the creatures within the 20-foot cube area where you cast this fail a dexterity save, attacks against them are made with advantage, and characters can't go invisible and things like that. And yes, sure, it's an action to cast, which means we're going to have a round of setup before our Nova round. But just remember, you are a bard, and you should probably be the one buffing your allies and debuffing your enemies. This is a great debuff that's going to make everyone in your party love you, so good job. But finally, and most importantly for this build, we have the Dissonant Whispers spell. This is probably, I think, my favorite bard spell, maybe next to Vicious Mockery, which you should also pick up as a cantrip if and when you can. Dissonant Whispers is only available to bards and actually Great Old One warlocks, unless you take a feat for it, of course, and is 100% on point both mechanically and thematically for this build. You cast Dissonant Whispers as an action, and then the target you cast it against has to make a wisdom saving throw, or they take 3d6 damage, half on a save. And then, because they are so terrified of whatever nefarious and sinister thoughts your discordant melody has invoked in their mind, they have to immediately spend their reaction to run away from you. Now, by itself, this is a pretty decent spell for a little damage, a little control, but my favorite thing about it is that if you cast it on a creature who's standing right next to you and they fail their save, it's going to give you a guaranteed attack of opportunity so long as you still have your reaction. Now, remember, with attacks of opportunity, you can only make them if a creature uses its own movement to move outside your range, right? And as we read in the player's handbook, you don't provoke an opportunity attack when someone or something moves you without using your movement, action, or reaction. Now, some DMs may rule that Dissonant Whispers is sort of moving the enemy outside of their control, and so you wouldn't get to make an opportunity attack. But rules as written, the creature is using their reaction and their movement, not because they were pushed, right? Even if they are moving as a result of failing a saving throw. And thus, if their running away takes them outside of your melee attack reach, you should get to make an opportunity attack against them. If it matters to you, again, Jeremy Crawford has confirmed this as well. So yes, now you could, on your turn, run up next to an enemy, cast Dissonant Whispers as your action, and if they fail their save, hit them with Booming Blade, since we have the Warcaster feat, and do some really nice damage on the hit. We interrupt this D&D character build for an errata correction. Up until this point in the video, I believe that everything I have said is true. Yes, Dissonant Whispers can provoke an opportunity attack, and yes, if you have Warcaster, you can hit them with Booming Blade. However, at this point in the video, I originally and mistakenly say that if you hit them with Booming Blade as they're running away because you cast Dissonant Whispers on them, that they would take the additional Booming Blade damage for moving. Alas, Jeremy Crawford has said otherwise, and a big thanks to Chris over at Tree Ant Monk's Temple, as well as a lot of the viewers of the Shorts video that I posted as a sneak peek to this one for drawing my attention to that little fact. Man, I thought I had researched all of the Jeremy Crawford tweets so well in preparation for this video. At our table, Dissonant Whispers does trigger Booming Blade damage for moving if they get hit with an opportunity attack as they run away, because we read the movement must be willing portion of the Booming Blade spell as anything other than being forced via like a push, say the Crusher feat or the Telekinetic feat or a Thunderwave spell. So in our mind, as long as you're actually moving your own movement, then it qualifies. I mistakenly assumed that's how it was intended. The good news is this. If it's a melee enemy that you're attacking, after Dissonant Whispers is cast and you've hit them with Booming Blade as they're running away, on their turn, they still are sheathed in that booming energy. So if they need to move up to somebody to make a melee attack, they're still going to take the damage. For that reason, I don't really feel like I need to adjust the numbers that I present during our damage reports, as I'm always crunching numbers for best case scenarios anyway, right? In this case, the only difference is I need to add that the best case scenario also includes that we're making our attacks against a melee enemy. And then, of course, assuming that they're going to need to move up on their turn to make an attack. Against ranged characters who do not need to move, or against melee characters who, for that matter, decide not to move, then the numbers that I present are going to be slightly lower. Not a lot, but a little. And I mean, hey, if a melee character decides not to move to avoid taking a D8 or 2 of damage from Booming Blade, that's probably going to be a win for our team, right? Because they're either going to just stand there doing nothing, or maybe they'll have an inferior action that they could take, like throw a javelin or something like that. Either way, I think that additional control that we're providing outweighs any little bit of extra damage that we'd get from the Booming Blade spell. Anyway, I just felt like I needed to stick that little caveat in here before we proceed, so we now return you to your regularly scheduled program. Really fun, really cool, strong. And also, just for flavor, I actually really love the image of these like nefarious whispers that lead to thunderous booms. But we're not all discordant melodies, right? Because at level 3, we'd be a Bard 2 and we get Song of Rest. We can bring the healing along with the pain. With Song of Rest, during a short rest, anyone in your party who spends hit dice to recover hit points can add an extra 1d6 for now. It scales thanks to your soothing song or oration. And then we also get Jack of all trades, of course, such a fantastic ability that lets you add half of your proficiency bonus rounded down to any ability check you make that doesn't already include your proficiency bonus. At level 4, we would be a Bard 3, and we get expertise, first of all. That lets us pick our 2 favorite skills that we're proficient in and double our proficiency bonus for them. I would think one of them should be performance, but maybe you're a Bard who regularly fails their performance checks, like my friend Preston. We also get second level spells, and there are some really great ones here, of course. Aid, Crown of Madness, I really like. Heat Metal, Hold Person, Invisibility, Lesser Restoration, Suggestion. Nothing that I will plan on using for our Nova round, so pick your favorites. And speaking of second level spells, keep in mind that Dissonant Whispers does scale. You get to add an extra d6 of damage for every level you upcast it beyond the first, so at this point it would do 46 damage if we were to use a second level spell slot for it. And of course, when I crunch numbers, I'm always going to assume we're upcasting, even though that might not necessarily be advisable. And then we also get our Bard subclass here, our Bardic College, and we, of course, are going with the College of Whispers. And we have to go with the College of Whispers, right? We're the Whisperer. We are using Dissonant Whispers. Anything else would be unthinkable. And I love Whispers Bards. They're probably my favorite Bard subclass, I think. And so as a Whispers Bard, we get Words of Terror first up. And this is actually my favorite Whispers Bard feature, even though I don't imagine it getting used all that often. You speak to a humanoid for a minute, and at the end of the conversation, they have to make a wisdom save, or they're frightened of you or another creature of your choice for an hour, or until it or its ally is attacked or takes damage. This is probably mostly for utility purpose, I would think, but it's such a cool concept. I just love the image of you like whispering words of dismay and woe into someone's ear, perhaps under the guise of an advisor, but with the intent to cause real fear and panic. I love it. It's very flavorful. Muy sabroso. But mechanically, the main reason that we went Whispers Bard is for Psychic Blades, of course. For a Bard who wants to do burst damage, it's a tough one to beat. With Psychic Blades, when you hit with a weapon attack, you can expend one use of your Bardic Inspiration to deal an extra 2d6 psychic damage. For now, that scales as you level up in Bard. You can only do this once per turn, and I'm actually grateful for that limitation, or else I might be tempted to try and burn all of my inspirations in a single big Nova round, and that would seriously detract from the point of this character, which is to be someone who functions primarily as a support character most of the time, but who can really just blow something up once in a while too. So save most of those inspirations for your allies, but once in a while, At level 5...
I think we're going to multi-class into fighter.
It must be done. Okay, it's not absolutely necessary, of course, but if we really want to get the most out of our Nova round, it kind of must be done. It's okay, we're not going to be here long, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with our Blade Whisperer spending a couple of levels honing their martial prowess, right? Their skill with the blade, right? So as a fighter at 1, we get Second Wind, which lets us heal ourselves a little bit once per short rest as a bonus action, and then we get a fighting style. I'm admittedly a little torn on this one. My original plan was to go with the dueling fighting style, and I think it's a perfectly valid choice. It lets you add 2 damage to attacks you make with one-handed melee weapons if you don't have a weapon in your other hand, and we don't. It would especially be decent for us outside of our Nova round, but I think thematically for this character, the thing that would be way super awesome would be to get Menacing Attack with the Superior Technique fighting style. So, right, Superior Technique gives us 1 maneuver from the Battlemaster maneuver list and a single D6 superiority die to fuel it with once per short rest. And I would take Menacing Attack here because with Menacing Attack, when we hit a target with an attack, we can add the d6 in damage and then force a Wisdom saving throw or the target is frightened of us until our next turn. And Frightened is a really nice debuff, giving them disadvantage on attacks and ability checks and preventing them from moving closer to you. This couples really nicely with the Dissonant Whispers we've supposedly hit them with, since they're forced to run away and then, for 1 turn at least, they can't come back. Admittedly, there's a fairly high likelihood that they're going to be dead from the damage that we do to them, as we'll see in a moment, but on the off chance that they survive, at least they're potentially out of the fight now for a round. Don't forget that at level 5, Booming Blade does scale up now so that it does an extra 1d8 damage on the initial hit, and then if they move, it's 2d8 damage, right? At level 6, we'd be a fighter 2, and yeah, we get Action Surge. It's the main reason that we're here. Once per short rest, you get to take 2 actions on a turn instead of 1. And it's going to do great things for our Nova round. Speaking of which, at level 6, it's time for our first damage report. And this is how I envision it all working. On round 1, I'm going to assume that we're casting Fairy Fire on our target. It's going to do great things for our entire party, us included. Round 2 is when we go Nova. First off, you use your bonus action to apply Hexblade's Curse on your enemy. You run up to them to get in melee range if you're not already, and then use your action to cast Booming Blade. You hit them for 1d8 from your weapon, plus 1d8 for Booming Blade, plus 1d6 from Menacing Attack, plus 2d6 from Psychic Blades, plus 3 from Charisma, plus 3 from Hexblade's Curse. Then you action surge and you cast Dissonant Whispers, dealing 4d6 damage if they fail their saving throw, half if they succeed, but regardless, they are going to take an additional 3 from Hexblade's Curse. Remember, Hexblade's Curse damage applies whenever we roll damage, not just when we hit them with an attack. And even if they're taking half damage, we still roll damage. We're still doing 3 more. Now, assuming they fail their saving throw, which I know they won't always, of course, but Wisdom is not a great saving throw for most enemies in D&D 5e, so I like our chances. But if they fail, they run away from you and you use your reaction to cast yet another Booming Blade, repeating all the damage we did before, sans the Menacing Attack and Psychic Blades damage, but then they move, taking that 2d8 damage for moving, for a total of 7d6 plus 68 plus 15. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class and a plus 0 to their saving throw, we would do 66 damage on average on that 1 round. And against an enemy with a 15 armor class and a plus 5 to their saving throw, it would be 57 damage. And almost 0 challenge rating 6 enemies are going to have that high a wisdom save for what it's worth. In fact, almost 0 challenge rating anything are going to have a plus 5 to their wisdom saving throw. So keep that in mind. And compared to other Nova damage builds that we've done to date, this level of damage is like lower tier 1 or upper tier 2 at this level. Check the video description to see those comparisons and graphs and spreadsheets and things. And thanks to the Bard features you bring, you still provide some nice support and utility to the party as well, which is great. And now that we have like the basic core of this build in place, I wanted to pause for a moment and read what the team over at dScryb came up with as a description for this character, since they are the sponsor for the video this week. Murmuring in a voice as smooth and fine as silk, The man casts an incantation. A mantle, dark and diaphanous as a shadow, drapes over his scale mail armor. The only light about him, the silver glint on the blade of a longsword. His whispers break beyond the reaches of normal sound and become a thing, an invader of the mind. The words are delayed and dissonant from the movements of his lips. The longsword becomes cloaked in the purple shade of twilight, and another voice, gravelly, powerful, commanding, joins the chant. He flicks the longsword up and lunges forward. A sound like a thunderclap tears through the air as an enchanted weapon arcs toward his foe. That is juicy and delicious as always. Man, I love the work that these people do bringing my characters to life. Most of my viewers know about dScryb, how they create fantastic box text, professional descriptions of just about anything you could want in D&D, from a setting to a character to a weapon to a spell to everything in between. Their writers are incredibly talented professionals, some of whom used to work for Wizards of the Coast even, and I'm always amazed by the quality of stuff they put out. Today, I simply wanted to highlight some of the recent additions that they've been making that just, I don't know, show what a thoughtful and kind group of people they are. Not to get overly political, but in light of the conflict that's currently happening in Ukraine, some recent additions dScryb has made to their library include things like a plea for peace and a speech about finding peace, that are written in these instances anyway from a character's perspective and might be used either as a player or a DM for an NPC to try and actually end a conflict that's happening in game peacefully, which I know is a little different than the way a lot of us, myself included, play D&D, but I think most of us have probably had someone at our table that likes to find a way to potentially end a fight without violence once in a while. And that's a perfectly valid and often interesting and memorable way to deal with encounters, I think. It feels particularly poignant at this moment for me. In addition, they've been adding some scenes to their library lately that pertain to disability and accessibility. Things like the cleric's lament about chronic pain, or the blind human's quip about footsteps. These new entries, to me, just show how mindful and inclusive this company tends to be, striving to ensure that they're writing for those, both players and even NPCs, who might otherwise feel disenfranchised or ignored. I don't know. I just appreciate the sensitivity and mindfulness that these kinds of things represent, and it just really makes me proud to plug the company on my channel. They not only create a really fantastic product, I think, but they genuinely, I think, try to be good people, and I like that. Anyway, if you haven't, you should totally check out dScryb. If you do so, please use this link here, dScryb.com/d4, so that they know that I sent you. I'll put the link in the video description, of course, but you can get a free account to get access to a ton of their content. And if you decide to sign up for a subscription to get access to even more, be sure to use the promo code D4 at checkout to get 10% off. Big thanks to dScryb, and let's get back to the build. At level 7, we're going to go back to Bard for a minute. We would be a Bard 4, and we get our first ability score increase or feat. We really need to get our charisma up, I think, as soon as possible, as it's so important to everything that we do, so I would bump charisma here, getting it to an 18. At level 8, I think I go back to Warlock for a minute, because there's just a lot that Warlock offers us here that is going to set us up nicely for some big Nova damage. First up, we get Eldritch Invocations. With Eldritch Invocations, we get to pick from like a fantastic list of abilities and enhancements that are very unique to Warlocks. For right now, we get 2, and I'm going to suggest first up that we take Devil's Sight. This lets us see in the dark, which is great for us since as a variant human, we don't have dark vision. And it even includes magical darkness. Yes, we're going to go there. Hold on a second. But as for the second invocation, I'm going to say pick your favorite, as we are going to be swapping it out at next level. Maybe Agonizing Blast to give more damage to your Eldritch Blast if you need to use it. But yeah, there's a lot of great options. At level 9, we would be a Warlock 3, and we get second level spells. So I think we ought to take Misty Step for an always useful short teleport as a bonus action option. And then, yes, I think I would, on this character, consider taking the Darkness spell. This is not a tactic that I've used for a really long time, and for good reason, I think. Using Darkness in combat can be potentially really disruptive to your teammates, but it might not be as bad as you think. Let's discuss. Darkness requires concentration, so no more fairy fire, obviously, if you're using it, but you cast it as an action. When you do so, you choose a point or potentially an object, and you could be carrying that object, right? And then from that point or object out in a 15-foot radius, everything is covered in magical darkness. The idea, of course, is that you put darkness on, say, your weapon or your shield or whatever, and now it moves with you so that your enemies can't see you, but since you can see them, thanks to the Devil's Sight invocation, you have advantage on your attacks against them, and they have disadvantage on their attacks against you. Of course, if your allies don't also have an ability to see in magical darkness, this can be problematic. That said, your allies can attack an enemy in that darkness with no disadvantage. The enemy can't see your ally, so that would give your ally advantage on the attack, but since your ally can't see the enemy, they would have disadvantage, and those two things cancel each other out, so they would just make the attack as normal. Of course, there are plenty of things in D&D that require you to actually see the thing that you're trying to affect, right? Spells, most predominantly perhaps, but there are plenty of other things like class and subclasses features as well. So yes, this can be disruptive. If you don't want to use darkness, don't. I really want advantage, and I think that thematically this works really well for this character. It comes with the added benefits of not giving enemies a chance to save against it like they do with Fairy Fire. It just works unless they have Tremor Sense or Blind Fighting or something like that, right? And it also gives them disadvantage to hit you, but you could always just continue to cast Fairy Fire if you and your party would prefer. I'm going to continue to assume regardless that you have advantage on your attacks, one way or the other. You do what's best for you and your party. Also, eventually we will get a spell that gives us the same benefits for the most part without all the drawbacks, but it's going to be a while before we get there. Now, Warlocks also get a Pact Boon at level 3 to enhance their Eldritch power, and I think we kind of got to take Pact of the Blade, mostly because of the important invocations that it's a prerequisite for, honestly. In and of itself, it basically just lets you create a weapon that is magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance, or lets you bond with an existing magic weapon if you have one, and then lets you summon it, which is cool. Also, might be important to note, we're told under the Hexblade features that our Hex weapon can now, if we take this Pact Boon, be any weapon type, including two-handed weapons, which were previously prohibited. So if we wanted to, we could now switch from a one-handed weapon and shield to a two-handed weapon to do a little more damage. We'll talk more about that in a second. And so now that we have Pact of the Blade, we can, and I think should, swap out one of our invocations for the improved Pact Weapon invocation, which makes our Pact Weapon a spell focus and gives it a +1 to hit and damage. Now, we're level 9. You very well might already have a magical weapon that's as good as or better than this. And if so, no worries. Stick with your other favorite invocation. Maybe take Thirsting Blade to get extra attack that we wouldn't necessarily use during our Nova round, but might come in handy sometimes from round to round later if you're finding yourself often still making attacks. I am going to assume we're taking this invocation and add it to our calculation since I know for sure that we can at least have this +1 if we need it. And speaking of calculations, let's do some for our level 9 damage report. Our tactics have potentially changed slightly since last time in that we might be casting Darkness on round 1 instead of Fairy Fire, but regardless, we're still casting a spell on round 1. And other than that, we've just added a +1 to our weapon attacks thanks to the invocation, and we've increased our Charisma modifier and our proficiency bonus since last check as well. And thus, against an enemy with a 10 armor class and a +0 to their saves, we would do 75 damage during our Nova round on average, and against an enemy with a 16 armor class and a +6 to their saves, it would be 67 damage on average. Alright, so that has plateaued fairly sharply now compared to other Nova builds, putting us closer to the bottom of tier 2 compared to others at this level, but we needed to make this investment to help set up for what's to come, and we are about to see some really big gains. First up, at level 10, we would be a Warlock 4, we get another ability score increase or feat. Now, my original plan was to take Great Weapon Master here. Naturally, right? I'm surprised we waited this long. A +10 to damage is a lot of damage. Here's the thing. Because we have a lot of nice ways to pile on some extra damage already to each hit, and we're about to get even more, that -5 to hit penalty, even if you're attacking with advantage, would have us, next time we do our damage report anyway at level 13, turning off the Great Weapon Master feat at an enemy armor class of 15 or higher, at least during our Nova round. And how often are we going to be fighting enemies with an armor class of 14 or less at this level? Now, if you wanted to improve your sustained damage on this character, then sure, go ahead and get Great Weapon Master and probably even Polearm Master, right? But then I guess I would have to ask, why are you playing this character? I mean, if you want to just be like a Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master character that just does a lot of sustained damage, there are a lot better options out there, I think. No, our plan is to blow something up and then revert to more of a jack of all trades, supporting and buffing and debuffing. And frankly, I love not feeling like I have to take Great Weapon Master here. It lets me keep my shield. Better yet, it lets me bump my charisma with this ability score increase, which I would do, and cap it at 20, which is so important for both our attacks and our dissonant whispers, and gives us more inspiration uses, etc., right? At level 11, we would be a Warlock 5, and this is a big bump for us. So first up, Booming Blade now goes to 2d8 on a hit and 3d8 if they move. And then we get third level spells. Of course, you should consider things like Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Fear, but I'm not planning on using any third level Warlock spells during our Nova round, at least, so I'm going to say pick your favorites. And we also, as a Warlock 5, get a third invocation. And this is the big bump for us damage-wise, because we now, at 5th level Warlock, get access to Eldritch Smite, which also has the Pact of the Blade prerequisite. Eldritch Smite works similar to its more holy cousin, Divine Smite, in that it lets you add, with a 3rd level spell slot now, 4d8 damage to the attack. The main differences are this is force damage, it will knock them prone if they are huge or smaller, and it can only be used once per turn. Again, something that I'm kind of grateful for. This is a big increase to our Nova round potential, and it also really helps push me towards the next multi-class dip that I would like to make with this character. Namely, at level 12, a Cleric. And, I don't see this again as something absolutely necessary for this character, especially if you'd prefer to just lean into the support aspect of your Whisperer. I actually wanted to get it a lot sooner on this build, but it just didn't make a lot of sense for reasons that we'll discuss in a minute. Now, the question that I have is, why is your suave on the outside, sinister in the middle Eldritch Whisperer suddenly getting religion or devotion to some high ideal, if you'd rather not be a religious cleric, I suppose? Maybe it'll make more sense when we discuss their divine domain, because yes, clerics get their subclass right at level 1, and we're going to go with the Grave Cleric. Now, perhaps you've been devoted to a god or goddess of the grave all along. Perhaps the pact that you entered into and the power that was given you was from one of their emissaries to begin with. Maybe you always knew that. Or maybe that's a revelation to you just now. Or perhaps your whispers have been whispers of the grave all this time. But regardless, as a Grave Cleric, you get some really nice features. First up here, we get Circle of Mortality. When you would normally restore hit points to someone who has 0 hit points, they're unconscious, you get to restore the max amount of hit points instead of rolling. And considering that arguably the most efficient way to heal in 5e is just waiting to heal an ally until they've dropped to 0 hit points, this is a nice little bump and makes us an even better support character, I think. You also get the Spare the Dying cantrip for free and can cast it from range instead of with a touch as a bonus action, which is really nice, especially if you don't have the spell slots for Healing Word. At least now you can stop those death saving throws as a bonus action from range, right? And that'll be handy sometimes. We also get Eyes of the Grave here, which works similarly to the Paladin's Divine Sense in that you can sense undead only within 60 feet that aren't behind total cover, wisdom modifier times per day. This will be occasionally useful. We also get cleric spells here, and I would say take the usual good ones, guidance, bless, etc. Nothing that I'm going to plan on using for our Nova round necessarily, so pick your favorites. And don't forget that thanks to multiclassing, we now have 3rd level non-warlock spell slots, right? Warlock spell slots and other spell slots don't mix, they don't benefit from multiclassing at all. But with Bard and Cleric, we now have 3rd level spell slots there. So Dissonant Whispers could be upcast now to 5d6 if we wanted. I guess it could have been before with a Warlock spell slot, but we're probably saving those, I think, for Eldritch Smite, because that does have to use a Warlock spell slot. At level 13, we would be a Cleric 2, and all Clerics get Channel Divinity at this level. They can use it once per short rest for 3 things, actually. First up, turn undead. That tells us, as an action, you can force any undead within 30 feet of you to make a wisdom saving throw, or they have to flee from you for a minute. Situationally, really powerful when you're fighting undead with low wisdom saves, especially. Thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we also do get Harness Divine Power now, and that lets you exchange your Channel Divinity for a spell slot if you want. You can only do this once per day, but if you use it, you can recover a spent spell slot equal to half of your proficiency bonus rounded up. So that is a 3rd level spell slot currently, and that's really nice. But the main reason that we're here, of course, is for the Path to the Grave use of our Channel Divinity. And this is the feature that I almost tried to get earlier on this character. So let's get into it. With Path to the Grave, as an action, you curse a target, and then the next time that you or an ally hits it with an attack, your cursed target is vulnerable to all the damage of that attack, meaning everything is doubled, including bonuses to attack that aren't typically doubled on a critical hit, for example. So let's get into tactics here with our level 13 damage report. Since Path to the Grave takes an action to use, in order for us to take advantage of it on our Nova round, we need to use Action Surge, right? So we would now bonus action Hexblade's Curse, action for Path to the Grave, Action Surge Dissonant Whispers. We still haven't made a weapon attack. And then, if and when they move, we reaction Booming Blade for one big, huge, massive attack. We are a true one-hit wonder now. The thing is this. Really, until we got Eldritch Smite, trading 2 Booming Blade attacks with Action Surge, one with our action, one with our reaction that we were doing previously, for double damage on a single Booming Blade attack now with our reaction wasn't incredibly appealing. The only real benefit is to the things that we are doing that are only added to 1 attack per turn. Previously, that was just 2d6 from Psychic Blades and 1d6 from our Menacing Attack superiority die. So if we would have gone Grave Cleric before getting Eldritch Smite, we really just would have been exchanging 2 Booming Blade attacks for 1 Booming Blade attack and getting an extra 3d6 damage. But now that we have Eldritch Smite, we could potentially double that 3d6 that we weren't doubling before, plus another 4d8 if we use Path to the Grave and switch from making 2 Booming Blade attacks on a turn to 1 Path of the Grave enhanced attack. And so it just made more sense, I think, to push for Warlock 5 before dipping into Cleric. But once we had Warlock 5, it became really difficult to ignore that Cleric dip. So, since last damage report, we have added 1d8 to Booming Blade to both the initial hit and when they move, plus 1 to our Charisma, plus 1 to our proficiency bonus, a 1d6 to our Dissonant Whispers, potentially, 4d8 from Eldritch Smite, and then we are now doubling all of our attack's damage. Not the Dissonant Whispers damage, of course, nor the extra damage the target takes from Booming Blade when they move, because that's not technically part of the attack. I suppose your DM may rule otherwise. But anyway, we're doing the vast majority of this with a single glorious reaction attack. It is a lot of eggs in one basket, but when it lands, it will be spectacular. To the tune of, against an enemy with a 10 armor class and a +0 to their wisdom save, 154 damage on average, and against an enemy with a 17 armor class and a +7 to their wisdom save, which hardly exist in the game, that's 140 damage on average. And that's more than double since last time we checked, moving us right back into the upper half of tier 2 compared to other Nova builds at this level. That feels much better. At level 14, the question at this point really is, where do we go from here? One of my main initial motivations for building this character was I really wanted to do a mostly Whispers Bard. I kind of got off track a little bit. I've dipped into Whispers Bard a number of times, but the only time I ever took more Whispers Bard levels than anything, it was mostly just because I wanted the spell slots for Divine Smite. And, of course, if we really wanted to bump our Nova damage, we should have planned, I think, for getting Divine Smite at some point, right? I would have done it myself if not for that blasted 13 strength requirement, but I didn't want to dump Dex or Con to get it. And throughout this build, I've been saying things like, if you want to lean more into the support role, go back to Bard, go back to Bard. So I think for me, for this character, it's finally time to go back to Bard, as this hasn't really felt like a Whispers Bard since level 7 or so, and is also why I didn't feel like I could call this episode the Whispers Bard, but instead went with the Whisperer. I kind of like the Whisperer a little more anyway. But yes, I think our Nova damage is in a really solid place right now, and while we could just try to find ways to keep pumping our damage, taking rogue levels for sneak attack maybe, that would be nice. I want to develop our bardiness and finish things off there for this character. And it doesn't hurt that we do pick up a little more burst damage along the way while we're at it. So we would now be a Bard 5, and as such, our Bardic Inspiration die goes up to a D8 from a D6, a little bump, and then we get Font of Inspiration. And my biggest regret with the path that I took for this character, honestly, is delaying Font of Inspiration as long as I did. I think if I were playing this character in-game, I probably would have gone Bard 5 a long time ago. Maybe even as early as level 6 before even taking fighter levels. It just didn't do a lot for our Nova round, but it does a lot for our bardiness, because it lets us get our uses of Bardic Inspiration back on a short rest, and that just really lets us throw out so many more inspirations with consistency, which feels really nice and important for anyone who really thinks of themselves as a bard, right? We also would, at Bard 5, get Psychic Blades up to a 3d6 now, and that's a nice little bump. And thanks to Path to the Grave, that extra 1d6 is more like 2d6, so that's cool. We also get 3rd level Bard spells now, and there are so many good 3rd level Bard spells. Tiny Hut, Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Catnap, Motivational Speech, Slow, none of which I would plan on using during our Nova round necessarily, but a lot of great ones to consider. Pick your favorites. Keep in mind, we do now, thanks to multiclassing, have 4th level spell slots, so Dissonant Whispers could potentially do 66 damage. At level 15, we'd be a Bard 6, and we get Counter Charm, not my favorite ability, but it will be handy once in a while. With Counter Charm, as an action, you can essentially give you and your allies advantage on saving throws to resist Charm and Fear until your next turn. Much more interesting, I think, though probably no more useful in game, unfortunately, is Mantle of Whispers, which tells us that when a humanoid dies within 30 feet of us, we can use our reaction to capture their shadow and retain it until we finish a long rest. We can then use that shadow as an action to look like the dead person for an hour, even granting access to any information that they would have shared with a casual acquaintance, enough to pass yourself off as them by drawing on their memories. Man, this would lead to some of the most amazing in-game moments, and I want to hear yours. So if you've seen this work at your table to great effect, let me know in the comments and share it with everybody. And DMs, please give your Whispers Bard characters a chance to use this. Now, a creature can see through this disguise by making an insight check against your deception check. So maybe deception is something to take expertise in with this character, but you do also get a +5 bonus to your check. Man, this is just so macabre and creepy and awesome. I just love it. At level 16, we would be a Bard 7, and we get 4th level Bard spells. Dimension Door, Polymorph, of course, there are all these great ones to consider, right? But I think the one that I would really consider using for our Nova round anyway right now would be Greater Invisibility. Unlike regular invisibility, you can cast this on yourself or potentially somebody else and then continue to remain invisible even when making attacks and casting spells, thus enjoying those same benefits, right, of darkness and devil sight without the annoying darkness. Again, you could have just been using Fairy Fire for your advantage all along, and though the enemies get to save against it, it does have the advantage of benefiting your other party members and giving them advantage on attacks too, right? But getting to Greater Invisibility is, I think, another really compelling reason to not delay Bard levels like we did. We do now, thanks to multiclassing, also have 5th level spell slots, meaning that Dissonant Whispers could do up to 7d6 damage if we upcast it. And then finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Bard 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. I think we should probably go Resilient Constitution here, or just bump our Constitution. We do have advantage on concentration checks thanks to Warcaster and an okay Constitution score, so it might not be super critical, but definitely worth considering. On the other hand, since we started Warlock, we've had proficiency in Wisdom save, so we don't need Resilient Wisdom, but we could go Resilient Dexterity, as that's another important saving throw. Or maybe even a nice Wisdom half feat, since we've been at a Wisdom 13 all this time. Maybe Chef might be a good one to let us make treats for our friends. Whatever you decide, I think it should probably be defensive-minded, as there's not really a lot that's going to give us big bumps to our Nova round of damage anyway at this point. And don't forget, at level 17, Booming Blade gets its final uptick, 3d8 when you hit and 4d8 if they move. And so, for our final damage report, no, we haven't seen a lot of big damage increases since our last check. A little more Booming Blade damage, a little more Psychic Blades damage, a proficiency bump, a little more Dissonant Whispers damage potentially, but a quality of life improvement with greater invisibility and a ton of nice support, utility, and even control improvements potentially. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class and a +0 to their saves, we would do 188 damage on average during our Nova round. And against an enemy with an 18 armor class and a +8 to their save, it would be 169 damage on average. We almost hit that bicentennial barrier. We were so close. And yeah, we plateaued again a little bit since last time, not surprisingly, putting us closer to like the bottom of the pack versus other tier 2 builds at this level. Okay, fine. Just for fun, what if we would have found a way to get 2 levels of Paladin here? Our damage in that case would have been 242 and 225 respectively. So about 50 to 60 more damage on our bonus round at the cost of our own survivability and utility and support. But just in case you were wondering, I was. All right, let's talk about final thoughts. The tier score for this character, if you average all of the damage that we calculated for each enemy armor class at each of the damage reports, would be 109. And that does put us at kind of near the bottom of tier 2 compared to other Nova damage builds that we've done. So yeah, sure, there's a part of me that thinks maybe I should have taken a lower dexterity and constitution score and gotten that strength up to 13 so we could do Paladin because blowing stuff up is really fun. Or maybe just some rogue levels to get some sneak attack. It wouldn't be quite as potent, but it would have been a nice damage increase. But I don't know. I suppose I'm still feeling much like I was a couple of weeks ago when I talked in the preamble of the Hammer Time episode. You know, doing damage is fun and awesome. But the other things you can do in combat in D&D besides just more damage can also be fun and awesome and are often arguably even more valuable for you and your party. And if you can do both, and make no mistake, we can, then it's just the best thing ever. So no, I have no true regrets about building a character who can inspire their allies, debuff their enemies, provide some fantastic utility, has options for control, brings solid support features, and who can still blow stuff up. In fact, like I said, if I were playing a version of this character in game, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see myself go Bard 5 a lot earlier before pumping up more burst damage potential because being good at a lot of things keeps the game interesting and fun and does great things for your party's combat encounters. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see me go Warlock 1, Bard 1, Fighter 2, Cleric 2, Paladin 2. All by level 8 so I could be the greatest one-hit wonder of all time. That actually wouldn't be all that great mechanically. I crunched the numbers on it. You give up too much. But you build this character how you want to. That's the beauty of D&D, right? So many options, even with the same essential character concept. So that's the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I love you madly. Thank you for all that you do for me, for the channel. You're the best. I hope you check out the other content in the channel if you're not in the habit of doing so. I hope to see you again very soon, but more than anything, I hope that you stay safe and that you have a fantastic day and that you be good and kind and all of those things. All right, take care. Bye. Don't you know? Talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper. Okay, I need to redo that whole thing. And finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution, oh, oh, oh. Doodly-doo, dee-doo-be-doo. Down just a smidgy smidge. If you need to give more damage to your outer... Well, I don't need to say that, I suppose. So for this character, when we first meet... Well, don't say that. Why do I have such a hard time with this one? Don't say that. Well, actually, I'm not even going to say that. Well, don't say that. Don't say that either. Don't you know? Talking about a revolution, it sounds like a whisper.